1993, and this is our house in that blizzard of 1993, which we just celebrated the anniversary of. And this was our home at 138 Norwood Avenue in Asheville. I feel like some melting happened here because I remember the snow being even higher, but this is when you can finally get out the door and take a picture. So my involvement with the city started a long time ago for me. This is a clip from, I think Mount Express ran City Watch. I don't know who did, but when I was 25 years old, this very unflattering picture was taken of me, and I was an intern with the city of Asheville. And I was, they wrote, I guess it was a slow news cycle, but they wrote about me making a presentation about annexation to the city council. And so I'm 46 now, so this was 21 years ago when I was a student at UNC Chapel Hill. I was doing a dual degree in public administration and in law, and over the summers I would try to find different jobs to help me think about what kind of career I wanted to have. And so this summer I was able to work for the city as an intern, and the city manager at that time was Jim Westbrook, and they let me do an annexation. Little did I know that that's very unpopular, and so they gave it to me. So this is me graduating from law school, and my mom and my dad's in this picture, and my brother. My sister's not, and I don't know where you were, Cora, but you weren't there. And my boyfriend at the time, whose name is Mark Harris now, my husband, and we now have 3 boys together, but that was many years ago. And this is what I looked like after I had all those kids. I'm very tired, and I'm being a lawyer at the Van Winkle Law Firm. I was an associate and trying to make partner, and thought it would be great to have all these kids and all that at the same time. And then shortly after this, I decided to run for office when my youngest was 2. So you can see there he's just newborn. So not too long after this, I must have recovered and thought, I can do something else. So, and so here we are. We've made it through that period of time, and this is us at Diwali, right? We're at the celebrate. This was this last year, and there's Mom on the right, and Cora's right there in there. She came with us to this one, so the whole family. So we made it out, and not long after this, I was sworn in for my 2nd term as mayor, and there we all are. So I hope that was somewhat historical for you, but I did want to share with you a little bit of information, and again, we were just sort of given, some direction, but sort of we're free to talk about whatever, and we will have a time for questions if you have any particular questions. But as I mentioned, my family did move to Asheville in 1988, and I was going into my senior year of high school. So I spent my last year of high school at Asheville High, and our family had never lived in the South before, and we were moving here from Washington, D.C., so it was a big change for me. It was fascinating and interesting to me. On the one hand, I was a little bummed out because I thought it would be boring in Asheville compared to the metropolitan, D.C. where I was living. But it turned out to be a fascinating community, and I don't know how many of you lived here in 1988, how many were here that long ago. So it was a little boarded up. There were some things downtown. We had malaprops, and I like to go to Stone Soup. I don't know if anyone remembers that. There were a few things. I spent time working. I worked as a lifeguard at Rec Park Pool, at the North Asheville Country Club, at the Jewish Community Center. I worked at China Palace, which was across the street from the mall, as a bus boy or a bus girl, I guess is the case being. I mentioned I interned with the city. I also worked for a law firm to see what that was like, and I worked for Meals on Wheels of Buncombe County, and that was kind of the first job I had that really opened my eyes to the broader community here in Asheville and helped me see and hear people that I hadn't previously in my experience here. So that really sort of helped shape eventually what I would want to focus on when I moved back here in 2002. So after law school, I went to the legislature and I worked there for 4 years and really learned a lot about the interplay between cities and the state legislature. And I coupled that with my experiences here. And when I moved back here in 2002, shortly after the birth of our first child, I tried to look for ways to be involved in the community. And I started out working with the Jewish Community Center, which had been a home for me, and served on their board. And then I tried to grow my interest in the city. I've always had an interest in cities, and especially Asheville. So I applied to be on the Board of Adjustment, which I thought was a really interesting committee. And I did that for a while. And then from there, I just became more and more interested in local government. I had a legal career that put me in front of boards and commissions, county commissions, and city councils throughout Western North Carolina, as far away as Avery County Commission, or Hendersonville, or Maggie Valley, whatever the case may be. And I just thought that what cities were doing was the most interesting thing to me, but I needed to find a way to be able to do that as a job, as it were. So I eventually decided to run for office in 2009. I think I would liken running for office to having a child, in the sense that you're very excited about it because you don't know what the hell you're getting into. All the women know what I'm talking about. And it's quite an experience. I mean, it's actually a similar duration as well as a pregnancy. But you do it for several months. You have to raise all this money. You learn how to talk to people. You have to figure out how to explain who you are without them first telling you who you are. And it's extremely stressful, but it's very exciting. And then you have the whole other part of the job, which is learning how to serve, and that is, I remember recently a council member said to me, not Sheneika, said, the onboarding for this job is terrible. And I thought, that's because there's no onboarding for for an elected office. There's no training. There's no, there's not really, okay, now take these classes like you have a new job at a company or something, and you'll learn how to do this job. You have to really learn to figure it out. So, and then similar again to the child analogy, you forget how horrific it was to run for office, and then you do it again. So that's happened to me now 3 times, both with children and running for office. So I'm very jealous of people who run unopposed and they don't have a trial every time. But if you decide to run for any type of city office, that will not be the case. You will duke it out, as Sheneika can tell you. And I think I've sort of hit my 20 minutes. I wasn't really timing that, but
I think you're just right.
All right. So I'll be around.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
How's everybody?
Good.
All right. I don't have pictures, so maybe you might want to do something here.
Yeah, let's, there we go. Close back here. No, it's you.
No, that didn't work.
This one is closed.
I wish I would have bought pictures. It would have made it much more interesting. But I'm a storyteller, so I'll just give you all my imagination. I grew up in the era of Mr. Rogers, so just go there. So I grew up here in Asheville in 1978, was born here in Mission Hospital. My father and my mother also grew up in Asheville. And my father, he was a minister, but not your average minister. He was a Pentecostal minister. And Pentecostal ministers are very strict. in their doctrine and how they bring their family up. My mom, she was a school teacher here in Asheville, assistant school teacher, and she worked at Claxton Elementary School, and they were childhood sweethearts. They grew up in what we call Southside community near Asheville Middle School. I think geographically we'll call that Central Asheville, but the Southside community. So there were a lot of stories about what Asheville used to be, what the Black community used to have as far as like the economic footing and a lot of the educational supports at that time. So growing up a preacher's daughter, I didn't really have much of an outlet other than going to some of the community centers. Reed Center at the time was probably my favorite. On Mondays, they would have an open gym where community members would come and play basketball, but the guys were in the basketball, on the basketball court, and the ladies, you know, we watched, and throughout the generations, people were there and just in the spot because that was like where we came to commune and fellowship with each other around recreation. I'm the middle child. I have an older sister who was, I thought at the time was perfect until she turned about 25. I knew that she had some flaws. And she was Miss Asheville High at Asheville High. Well, she was Miss Asheville Junior High when Asheville Middle School was actually a junior high school. She was Miss Asheville High. She was also a debutante queen. She played in Asheville High's band. She played clarinet. And no harm, but everybody who plays clarinet is pretty much perfect. In my work. So anybody play clarinet here? Esther, yeah, I should know. But she played clarinet, and my father was a musician as well. So he wanted us to really play piano very bad. Well, let me go here. First, let me introduce you to my younger sister. My younger sister, her name is Shari. And she and I were very close. I think because we have a slight rebellious streak, but we found a lot of times playing with one another and kind of defying our parents together, you know, coming up with those little tricks that we would play to get out of going to church. That was a thing. Church Tuesday, church Friday, church Sunday, not only Sunday morning, but Sunday evening as well. So I live, breathe, and everything church. And it was all good. I mean, I appreciate it now, and I'll tell you that, the connection between my moral strength. But 3 sisters, I was in the middle. I was more recreational, more outgoing. My father really wanted us to learn how to play piano because he played piano. And he learned how to play piano from his teacher, who was at the time a school teacher at Stevens Lee High School. And Stevens Lee High School was very well-rounded. And I hope we all know a little backstory on Stevens Lee, so I can just kind of insert my story there. My father talked to me about Stevens Lee not only being an economic power, well, I'm sorry, not only an academic power, but also an athletic power. And he taught me how the entire child was enriched, not only through those avenues, if they wanted to go the athletic route, they could, but also music. Music was a very integral part of the community and bringing people up in well-roundedness. So my father, he also was over the gospel choir there at, not Stevens Lee, but Asheville, I think it was called, I don't know what it was called at the time. It wasn't Asheville Junior High at the time.
South French Broad.
South French Broad. They were the Bears then. So my father came up in that era where he played piano and was very instrumental in bringing together a lot of the musicianship of that school. He and my mother also went off to school together at a kind of a Christian school down in Mississippi. And they learned about the doctrine of what's called the Church of God in Christ, Pentecostal upbringing. And it was an academic and also doctrinal type of studies that kind of gave them theology and spirituality as well as academics. But they didn't finish. They came back to Asheville, and my parents started a church very early off in their marriage. So having parents from Asheville who started a church in Asheville, that meant that they were very much in the center of the community and the community's upbringing. Pastors, I guess in the 80s and the 90s or earlier years, were very in tune with what was going on politically. And anytime there was anything going on in the community that affected communities of color, usually the black pastor was the go-to person to communicate information back and forth from city officials to community and do some negotiations in between. So I found that my father wasn't really interested in that, but almost inherited that type of role. So oftentimes he would come, and I think pillow talk with my mother would probably consist of making a lot of decisions around what he would communicate to the community and what he would communicate back to politicians as it pertains to the development of the black community. So those stories didn't reach me, but somehow I think it was just kind of passed along to me through his love for community and his involvement. He was a very well put together man. Does anybody remember Costa's? Costa's Men's Store. My father worked there. My father worked there for many years, so he was a well-dressed man. And I think that gave him a slight advantage too when it came to being likable. He had everything going for himself. Very good looking man, he and my mom. He would dress her, ironically, instead of the other way around, and he would dress the entire family. So we kind of had this look like the Huxtables, you know, like he would have on the cool sweaters, and mom was all put together. She probably had, depending on the era, she probably had a mushroom or a nice tight afro, whatever was going on during the era. So we were well put together because it was about presentation. A lot of times in the black community, you didn't have the economic footing that you needed, but in order for you to be respected, if you look the part and you can speak the part, then you'll almost be accepted. You'll be called into rooms and pretty much listened to a certain degree. We had already know that history and how the limitation of power was put on people of color. So just to move us forward just a little bit, Asheville High School. I went to Asheville High in the 90s, 94. School was not my thing. I just did it because I knew I had to do it. It was just part of the checklist when you grow up in a family that is very educationally driven. So I went to Asheville High, and it wasn't until maybe the 11th grade, 10th grade, I had a teacher, his name was Mr. Smith. And I think he knew I was just falling back, just to fall back. But I guess I had shown some potential, probably in writing. So he said, next year we're going to move you to an honors class. And I said, I didn't ask for that. I didn't sign up for it. You didn't volunteer me for this. And he said, well, me and your mom have already talked about it. So we're going to move you to an honors class. And I said, okay, I'll go to the honors class, but you have to let me choose my teacher. That wasn't a choice. I ended up with Miss Eula Shaw. Miss Eula Shaw was an African-American woman who was probably the most stern teacher in the entire Asheville city district, and nobody liked her. It's like you heard stories about this lady when you were maybe in the 7th grade. They were grooming you, priming you for the disappointment if you got put in her class. Well, I was put in her classroom, and I guess she saw what Mr. Smith saw, and she had my sister in years past, so she got the bar was kind of raised high. And she also knew my father. So I remember going through her class and really having an interest in reading and learning because it was just something about a teacher who looked like you, who knew your parents, and I would say she had on speed dial, but I don't think they had cell phones then, not like that. But she would call my parents often and let them know if I was falling back. So, and that would kind of give me that push forward. But I remember that because she wasn't the only African-American teacher that I remember and that I admire. At Claxton Elementary School, Miss Avery, Miss Christine Avery, that name should ring a bell. Christine Avery was my kindergarten teacher. Miss Cunningham, Sandra Cunningham, was my second grade teacher. Christine Avery, as you all know, right now there is an after school named after her, the Avery Legacy. Christine Avery was the wife of Nihilus Avery, who was a pastor of Hill Street Baptist Church. So throughout my life, I'm making this correlation between these pastor-teacher relationships throughout Asheville's history, where you saw Black leadership, not only in the community, but you also felt it in the school system. We don't have many African Americans in the school system right now to give you that personal touch. And I think that is the transition that is missing right now, when you have teachers who can speak your language, also be able to relate directly to your parents and give you that extra push that you need. And just that seeing eye to eye was something that I believe pushed me forward. So I'm in 11th grade, I'm getting it, I'm loving it, reading novels and everything, something I did not do. I would pretend, but I wouldn't actually do it. And I think my parents started to see a change in my interest. So my mom started talking to me about going to college. And I said, no, I don't want to go to college. I want to experience freedom in Asheville just for a little while, because I knew when I turned 18 and graduated, you know, that curfew word would kind of die. And I would be able to experience just a little bit. So that didn't happen for me. I remember coming home one day from Reed Center after hours, probably, after curfew. I was that type of girl, just stayed out, and I did what I wanted to do. And I came in and there was a large Foot Locker at the bottom of my bed. It looked like somebody had been to maybe Walmart or something, and everything was stocked up in bulk. And I went downstairs, I said, are we moving somebody in? My mom said, no, we're moving somebody out. And that person was me. She sent me to school, Winston-Salem State University, and it changed my life. Any Ram potentials in the house? Okay, that's wonderful. And it was there that I remember a political science. Where am I with time? Okay. I remember a political science teacher. His name was Larry Little. At the time, he was following a case of a man who was falsely accused of raping a white female in the 80s, and he had spent a number of years in prison. And I remember this teacher giving us the background on not only his case, but I guess the appeals that he had put forth. So this had opened me up a lot more to what it meant to really be an advocate for people and what modern day abolitionists look like. So I remember going downtown in Winston-Salem, and all the students from our college, we were really revved up to free this guy who had been falsely accused, because that was around the time that DNA testing had come into play. And he was, they did a DNA test and found out that he was actually not the guy that they thought he was. And then we experienced this victory together as an institution and went down in history. We were all on the front of the Winston-Salem Tribune, I believe, Journal at the time. So, great transition in my life. I ended up staying in Winston-Salem after I graduated from college, working at the television station, WXII News Channel 12. Went through my life in Winston-Salem, found myself kind of bored by the work at the WXII News Channel 12. I loved learning the development of all the technology, but the news was the only thing that changed. Like every day it was the same routine, and something about it just kind of drove me crazy. So I knew it was time for me to transition. So I kind of jumped out there, taking a leap of faith. It's kind of like my thing. I take a leap of faith, and I landed in what's called a treatment facility or a therapeutic milieu with juvenile sex offenders. And they really taught me what it means to develop as a community. for young men who were ostracized from society and estranged from their communities, really come together in more of a peer support type of setting until they transition back into their homes. And I think that was probably the deepest impact that I've had seeing a community develop. Moved back to Asheville, 2 children later, moved back here to Asheville and really saw Asheville in a different way. Asheville wasn't the city that I left. I spent lots of time downtown and had a desire to really see my community, the African American community, like a phoenix, rise from ashes. And I started talking to different people about what it would mean for the Black community to have somewhat of a revival. And people were really ready for it. Leadership had changed, and leadership has changed a lot. And we are burgeoning, or we are emerging as new leaders with fresh ideas, with connections with other coalitions throughout our nation, throughout the state and throughout the nation. And I'm glad to be a part. I remember 2016, I was a part of a cohort under the Amy Mandel and Katina Rodas Foundation called ZDEC. And ZDEC, I think, is Jewish for Justice. And I joined this cohort, and it gave me a lot of experiences. We went to a conference the day after Trump was elected called Facing Race. And all of these social justice leaders and racial justice leaders from around the nation, they met during this conference to be on the cutting edge of base building and movement development. And I remember looking at a lecture from a lady, she's a feminist. People would call her a badass feminist. Her name is Roxanne Gay. And Roxanne Gay, she gave us instructions. And her instructions were kind of written on the tablets of my heart. And she said, there comes a point where your activism hits a cap, and you cap out. And there's no more that you can do as an activist. No matter how loud you yell behind the bullhorn, no matter how eagerly you organize people, somebody has to influence policy making. And she said, my word to you all today is don't think about creative ways to do it on the ground. There are plenty of people who can do that. Somebody has to move up and infiltrate. And those are the words that she said. So I was thinking like, yes, that is me. I am going for it. And then 12 forums later, I was thinking like, what the heck did I sign up for? It was exhausting. My kids were rooting for me to lose. We hope you lose. This is not going to be good. My 9-year-old said this city council thing is not going to be good. They're never going to spend time with us. So, you know, I think they're getting into it now. And they have a lot of questions. And, you know, they kind of rabble-rousers when they go to school. Because they hear me talking and they go to school and say things to their peers. And then I get calls from teachers about like, why aren't there Black people in our curriculum, like in our school books? And like, okay, we'll work on that. But they hear me say things, so they're applying it to their own lives, which I think is very interesting. And they call everybody by their first and last name, like Esther. Did you see Esther Manheimer today? How about VJ Kapoor? But this is my life, this is my story. I wish to come back again so that I have pictures. Pictures would be very interesting because, you know, my family, we had big hair and, you know, kind of like I do. Might see me with long hair one day, short hair, big hair, red hair. I haven't done blonde yet, but I will do it. But thank you for this time.
That was certainly energizing and uplifting. So let's move along to questions. I hear you about the voting thing. The last time my husband ran for office, I said, oh, I think I'm not going to vote for you this time. You just reached that point. Let's take some questions from the floor, and I guess you can stand up and just use the handheld mic. Any questions? Yes.
How did Mayor meet Mr. Harris?
Okay, so my husband, I can see who asked the question. Yeah, oh, okay. So this is, so I had been a lifeguard at the Jewish Community Center on Charlotte Street when it was just a house. I don't know if anyone remembers that. It used to just be a house, and there was like a little pool next to it. They only needed one lifeguard. But then one year they finally raised all this money and they decided to build the pool that actually just got ripped up. And they actually had to advertise for lifeguards so they could hire more. And anyway, my husband is from Inca Candler. He went to Inca High School. I always joke, he's like county mouse, married city mouse. His mom was like, hey, they're paying more with JCC than at Hominy Valley where you've been lifeguarding. So he showed up, and I walked in one day and looked across the pool, and there he was. And I always think about that moment, like flash forward. But that's how we met. So it was kind of fun because he got to know the Jewish community through that experience. So.
Yeah, question?
You both, I think, kind of alluded to the fact that there's no in-service training for your jobs. So for each of you, what do you see as the main sources of how you've learned how to make one?
Go ahead.
When I came on, VJ and I came on together, and we had no relationship prior to this, but we formed a bond because out of everybody running, I think there were 12 people who ran. Esther, VJ, and I were the only ones with children, so we would give each other that sympathetic look, like, how are the kids? So when we came on, we were trying to think about getting different policy briefings with department heads, and the list that they gave us, we weren't very happy with. So VJ started planning, like, we just really want a briefing with all department heads. We want to know what's going on and what the developments are and what's on deck. So that kind of happened. So I'm hoping that will be a thing when other people on board, that they will have this briefing of each department and where they are, how many staff members they have, and what the budget for each department is. But another thing is very unpopular, but I think it's very educating, but you have to do some fact checking, but Asheville politics. There's a lot of information on Asheville politics because everybody's a politician on the Asheville politics. I wish they would have the bravery to run, as many strong opinions as you see, but there's a lot of information that you can get from Mountain Express, Asheville Blade, Asheville Citizen Times. But then just sitting down with people and asking questions. I can always call Esther or Keith or Gwen. You just have to, get that camaraderie going and jump in there and do some studying on your own.
I would say for me, it was kind of a different experience because I came with a technical background. I mean, I had a degree, the degree you get if you want to be a city manager or a department head or something like that, and having the legal background. I remember after our first closed session with Sheneika, she was like, what? Because, you spend all this time talking about legal matters. And so I sort of had the technical training, and I always say everybody brings their own unique strengths to the office, and you really need a variety of backgrounds. And I'm more of the, academically, I've been schooled on how all this works, and I spent a lot of time with cities and counties, as I've mentioned, in the state, so I know from a technical aspect how it works. But the thing about Asheville, like other very hip, popular cities, you have to know, if you're going to run for city council, the issues that are unique to Asheville. And because you are going to have to go to 20, 25 candidate forums where every different group under the sun hosts the forum, and they have their own set of issues, and they're going to ask you where you stand. Where are you on animal rights, and are you for or against banning the circus, and do you, I don't care what it is, but you got to know. And there are people who naively go pay that $75 and file, because that's all you have to do. And then they get into these, and you can tell they're like, I didn't know I would have to have like a PhD in, all things Asheville politics. So but the people who do well have really learned the issues and done some work ahead of time, so they're able to, and then they enjoy it a little more.
Question over here, but I just wanted to say there are 6 teenagers running for governor in Kansas. So they may be actually better equipped to do that. And they're learning to get a dog. Yeah.
Esther, how come we don't have guardrails on our mountain curbs?
We do have some guardrails.
Other questions, yes, sir?
Can you pull the curtain back on Gary?
No, we're here for other things.
Well, I will offer this, that, so in North Carolina, we have a council manager form of government. So, this is one of the tensions that we have in, of course, rolling our eyes to hear this. So, there are plenty of places around America where they have a mayor strong system, and you'll hear the mayor did this, and the mayor did that, and the mayor's budget, and they just snap their fingers and change this thing. But in North Carolina, we don't have mayor strong cities, so the mayor cannot just say, you know what, I've decided I'm going to do my own homelessness prevention program. You have to work with your council, and the council hires a manager. The council is like a board of directors, your manager is your CEO, and runs your day-to-day operations. They are full-time on the ground, and that's how cities in North Carolina function. And those managers serve at the pleasure of the council. So if the council decides to make a change, they can make that change. And for me, I've been on the council the longest now of anyone there, since 2009, and it's been a real study for me, because I think it's easy to say, I'm unsatisfied with this manager, they weren't able to accomplish the sun and the moon and the stars, let's change managers. And that happens in some places where it changes a lot. But I know enough, because I've spent time with other cities and been to the school where they train all the managers, to know the grass is not necessarily greener. So I think for my part, I've tried to be very measured about making these transition decisions. So just know that it was a carefully thought out decision. I would just offer that.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes.
Sheneika, you said that when you came back to Asheville after you worked in Winston-Salem, that the city had changed a great deal. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, downtown was a lot different. When I left, I believe it was still pretty slow. We had just started to develop downtown and refurbish some of the buildings. My community, the Black community, had changed a lot. When I left, they were very defined, pronounced Black communities. The Montford area, even the Kenilworth area had a lot more African American residents. My community, the Southside community, Mr. Harris lives, Southside community. On our street, between Blanton Street, Bartlett Street, which is kind of very close to, again, Asheville Middle School, Choctaw, South French Road, that area.
We're on the edge of the South Slope now.
We're on the edge of the South Slope. So interesting story. When I came back home, I had like this huge Buick. And in the Black communities, honestly, when we arrive at home, if there's a car in the driveway, you just pull your car or your whip, as we call it, pull your whip on the sidewalk. But I knew things were changing in my community, and I'm making a joke out of it, but it's a serious issue. I knew my community was changing when I got a ticket for parking on the sidewalk. And I came downtown and I said, well, I don't understand why I got this ticket. And they said, oh yeah, you read here because the bikers and the runners want space. And that was my cue that, okay, the community is changing. And sooner or later, I believe Mr. Harris on his street, he's probably the only African American on the street. When in my day, I used to babysit his kids, and our entire block was, just full of African Americans and pretty affluent African Americans. I spent a lot of time at Isaac Coleman's home. He lived at the top of the hill, and at the time, I didn't know that he was a political activist because he would stay in his room, watching television and tell us to stay out and stay away, And then Mr. Hart, if anybody knows Hart Funeral Home, he stayed maybe 2 doors up from me, and we used to play Pick 'em Up, Get Busted. If anybody, Pick 'em Up, Get Busted, it's like football, but tackling, females too, we got tackled too. We were very tough young ladies, so my entire block was full of people that I knew and people who were very instrumental in Asheville's history. But now when I go back to the south side, I believe my grandmother's house was torn down maybe 2 years ago, and now the value of her house is maybe $300,000. Crazy. So things have changed a lot.
Yeah, go ahead. Take it away. What other questions do we have?
Maybe I missed it, but, so I heard that sometimes the urban renewal displaced some people, so I'm curious if you already said it, maybe I didn't hear it, but did a lot of people leave, and was that kind of a big cause of it?
I believe when we're seeing that there are waves of tragedy and turmoil in communities of color, coming from slavery to the civil rights era, and the new Jim Crow, where we see a lot of the African American families being torn apart because people are being put in and forced in to the penal system. So we go from redlining to a wave of urban renewal, to the wave of gentrification. So I would say that now we're living in the age of gentrification, but it's just a modern day urban renewal and redlining to me. So we're living in different waves of trauma on the economic footing of Black communities. So I would call it pretty much intergenerational downward mobility.
I'd like to ask both of you, since this is Women's History Month, if you had any advice for, let's say, 18-year-old young ladies graduating from high school. What would your advice be now that you've been in elected office and public service and so forth? You've sort of seen 20 years into the future, 25 years into the future from that age. What advice would you give a girl who's going to graduate from Asheville High School this spring? And then ask her to answer that too. As they embark on adulthood, what's moving forward?
When I was in school, I was there because my parents made me go. And I didn't make the connection with my success in life. I lived day to day. But now that I think about it, my educational experience, that was my early career. And if you would think about your education as your job, your responsibility to yourself, to develop yourself, and also develop yourself so that you can be an instrument of change for society. If we would instill that in young women, that I'm not doing this for myself, for my personal wealth, for my individual satisfaction, but I'm doing it to impact my family, impact my community, impact my generation, then I believe that just shaping a new paradigm in young women by mentoring women and being a part of women's groups will be more powerful than just entering into an educational experience or going through life just looking for this individual success.
Great answer.
And we get asked this question now. Sheneika will start getting asked this question a lot. This is a surprising question to me. It's surprising how often we get asked this question, and it's a hard one to answer for me. I always tell people that they need to figure out what they're passionate about, what they're interested in, and then figure out how to do that. And so it might not necessarily mean you want to run for office or you want to be involved in politics, because that comes with its own set of challenges. But then layered on top of that, and something that nobody, including my mom, really warned me about was, the difficulty of having a family and a profession and a passion. Those are three really hard things to marry, and I think they're probably even harder now in a sense that there are more opportunities for women, but our lives are so crazy and so busy, and I don't know, to me it seems like it's even more challenging to balance all those different desires. So I have a lot of different women friends who have chosen just not to to get, and, they are limited in what they get involved in. They spend a lot of time with their families and their children, and I think that's a great choice for them, and I'm envious and jealous about how much more relaxing it seems to me. Although raising children and doing city council, I don't know, it's pretty hard, but sometimes city council's like a break. To me, it's just about finding out what you're really interested in. And I spend a lot of time trying a lot of stuff out, just really trying to explore, and I'm trying to encourage my children to do that too.
Good. Thank you. Let's take a break here. If you'd like to mingle a little bit, enjoy the refreshments in the back. Thank you both so much for spending this evening.